Hey, everybody, Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks. Welcome back. Hey, as a guy who spent my whole career in manufacturing, as those of you who've paid attention know, um, I certainly love, all the equipment that we use to make what we make. But I'll also admit, haven't always taken the best care of it. Our guest today is going to tell us about using modern methods, AI, and data collection, data analysis to allow OEMs, the providers of equipment, to better track the installed base and to communicate to their users things like when maintenance is due, when replacement should happen, those kinds of things, where we can get better and better at what we do. His name's Vivek Joshi. He founded a company called Entytle Inc., and he's going to tell us all about it in just a few seconds here on Manufacturing Talks. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host. I'm glad to be joined today by Vivek Joshi. He is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Entytle Inc. Welcome, Vivek. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Enjoying a cool California day today.
Ah, beautiful. Yep.
Yes.
Fall is definitely here, huh?
Yes, definitely.
Well, good. So great story with Entytle. We've talked before for a Forbes article, like a lot of folks I have on, but I'm really interested in getting into the nuts and bolts of what you guys do. Before we do that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Great. I'm an engineer by training. Jim, I grew up in India, studied chemical engineering, and like a lot of people back in the 80s, I migrated to the US to study first. I came to grad school at Virginia, and then I went back to business school at University of Virginia, and then started my corporate career. And the hallmark of my career, now I was dating myself, about 32 years in manufacturing. Started as a factory floor guy, running a factory floor for Johnson & Johnson, then moved into manufacturing management consulting, then ran a business at GE, and eventually wound up moving to sales and marketing. But I've always been in and around manufacturing, equipment manufacturing, and then also services and aftermarket, right? So those are the three kind of commonalities in my entire career so far, which is now 30 plus year career. And about a decade ago, I started this company called Entytle. It's a software company that I started to kind of solve the problems that I had faced in my manufacturing career that I mentioned. And primarily when I was in the services businesses at Sun or GE, there was things that I couldn't quite make work as easily. So I eventually, in 2014, said, I've had these problems. I think other people have the same problems. Let me see if I can build a company around it. So that's what eventually led me to start Entytle.
Yeah, excellent. It's interesting because, of course, I have a similar background, years and years and years, working in factories. And the Entytle story caught my eye because there's so many things that go on that the general public doesn't know about around how things are made, right?
Right.
And that's really what your company is aimed at. So tell us a little bit more about what led you to your idea and to founding Entytle.
Yeah. So, just like you, when I was in manufacturing, in the equipment manufacturing business, we tended to have a business model that was composed primarily of two parts, right? We made equipment and shipped it to our customers. And then after that equipment is installed at the customers, and these are typically B2B customers I'm talking about, we tended to have a nice little service business, as we call it, aftermarket or service business, where we sold them parts. Sometimes they were consumables, but definitely sold them time and materials services or contracts and so on and so forth, right? And in almost every company I worked at, I always was in this manufacturing of equipment and then servicing of equipment. Mm-hmm. In the servicing of equipment, what I discovered when I was first at GE and then eventually at Sun, when I was running the marketing operation for the services business, is that when you wound up being a large company like a GE or a Sun, you had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of customers, and your product or asset was installed in literally hundreds of thousands of locations. Yep. And if you are trying to build a proactive service business, which is to say that I'm going to actually go and contact each of my customers who bought my stuff and at the right time sell them the right part of service, it's pretty much impossible to do that. Sure. Right? Yep. And because you literally didn't know where stuff was. And if you knew it, you didn't know what happened to it, right? And if you knew what happened to it, then you could do something about it. But those first two questions are hard to answer. And so that's kind of what led me to say, well, everybody has the same problem, and maybe I can find a way to solve that. Where's my stuff? What happened to it? And therefore, what do I do about it in the context of a service business?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
So
which, is really fascinating to me because I was really on the other side of that in operations that were using things like you made. So that makes perfect sense to me. For the general audience, though, talk a little bit more about, those hundreds of thousands. What is like the use that you're looking at with
yeah,
those cases?
yeah. So for example, when I was at General Electric, we sold these big the locomotives, right? We sold them to
Mhm.
big railroads, and they shipped all over the country. They traveled all over the country.
Yep.
Those locomotives lasted for 15, 20, 25 years. And just like a car, you needed to maintain it and manage it. And
Mhm.
the use case was trying to know when's the right time to contact one of these big railroads to provide a proactive and preemptive spare part replacement or service so that the locomotive maintains operation and productive operation for the railroad.
Yep.
So the use case was getting in front of the customer to make sure that we can optimize the value of that asset for a longer time, right?
Yep.
In the part of, in the sale of parts and service.
Yeah,
Does
very
that make sense?
interesting.
So for example, when you were an operations manager at the factory where you had a motor or a turbine or a compressor,
Yep.
somebody would contact you, either the OEM would contact you or a third party would contact you, or sometimes the competitive provider would contact you, right? Saying, hey, Jim, that motor that's sitting on the side of the line, maybe it's time to overhaul the windings or whatever it might be, right?
Yep.
Because you can now run it for maybe 5 years longer if you did that today versus letting it run to failure, right? And so those are the kinds of things that I'm enabling my OEM customers to go do.
Yeah. And you're potentially helping them avoid very costly
That's
downtime in the
exactly right.
process.
That's exactly right. For the
Yep.
end user, it is preventing catastrophic downtime, which is a big deal.
Very big deal.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I saw it on your website. Your term is installed base intelligence platform. So let's talk a little bit more about how you go about doing what you do.
Yeah. So remember, I said when we had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of customers and assets that are in the field, really getting an understanding for what that asset has been up to is hard. Now, you and I talked about IoT the last time we had this discussion.
Right.
IoT is all well and good, but I'd say still to this day, Jim, 95% of the world's fleets are what I would call unconnected, right? They
Mhm.
do have intelligence, they do have, some form of computing on board, but it's really not connected to stream data back to you all the time. So how do you figure that out? Fortunately for us, in a corporation like the ones I worked at, we have a lot of different data sources. We have ERP data that tells you where the asset was shipped to, what
Yep.
parts were bought, what consumables were bought. We have service data from the field. We have CRM data. We have tech support data, so on and so forth. So the collection of the data can provide intelligence about that asset. And in the manufacturing world, in the OEM world, Jim, we call it an install base, right? A machine that's
Yep.
installed, it's an install base. So about that install base, I can get intelligence from these other sources that are non-IoT sources, right? So that's how we piece those two terms together to call it install-based intelligence.
Yeah. And it's really interesting what you say about kind of bridging. I'm not going to call it the old world because it's still pretty modern, but the kind of legacy end of things versus stuff going in today. Today, things are very connected, but
Correct.
the other things aren't directly connected. But what really leaped out to me in looking at your stuff online was you talk about the ERPs and the CMMSs out there, places where that information is going, but then it's not being used,
That's
right?
right.
It's kind of that stranded data
That's
that
right.
people
That's
talk
exactly
about.
right.
So you're accessing that and using that for your installed base
Correct.
intelligence platform.
And stranded data is exactly the way those are exactly the words I use too. Because
Oh,
if you
really?
think about what if you think about what you said, ERP has data that only manufacturing people and finance people typically access.
Right.
Service data is typically just a field service practitioners, maybe, and somebody in service admin. CRM is sales, something else is
Yep.
PLM's engineering, but they're all stranded islands of data. But when you assemble that data together, Jim, magic can happen. And that was my thesis all along. And luckily it's been proving out now that
That's
that
excellent.
idea makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And anyone, I think, working in manufacturing, hearing that story is going to instantly see the power of what you're doing.
So this intelligence is really important because if the conversation when you and I met last time, also we talked about this whole aspect of the great retirement or brain drain that's happening in the manufacturing industry that you and I are so familiar with.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
and the classic example I give people is like literally when I was at GE, we literally had a 70-year-old guy we would not let retire because John knew everything. So if something happened, we'd go to
Yep.
John, hey, John, what about this XYZ at such and such mine? I was in the mining business back then too. And John, to his credit, knew everything, right? But there's only so many years we could keep John around, and there's only so many Johns going to hang around longer. So what do you do? And
Mhm.
then you have to start institutionalizing a lot of this information and knowledge and turn that into intelligence. And that's really, I think, the big push that's happening right now. And I think you're probably seeing it because you talk to a pretty wide variety of people in manufacturing,
Yeah.
and you're probably hearing and seeing this as much as I am, if not more. You know?
And it's interesting. I'm even hearing and seeing it in places I wouldn't have imagined. I just had um, uh, a guest talking about semiconductor manufacturing, which to me, has always been high tech and connected. And I'm thinking, well, they won't have these problems. No, they've
Right.
got the same problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You
that
know,
whole tribal knowledge thing, yeah,
it's a big
everywhere.
deal. It's a big deal. And, I just wrote something out. I wrote some content just last night, which, I think you'll relate to. So one of the interesting things that I'm seeing, and it took me a while to kind of get this registered in my brain. But if you think about the machines that we just talked about, every generation is getting more complex, if you may, right? The machine,
Mhm.
what started as mechanical, became electromechanical, now become computer electromechanical, right?
Sure. Yep.
So the complexity is just increasing over time, and in 2024, machines are pretty complex. But at the same time, there's still these 30-year-old machines that are mechanical in nature or electromechanical nature and so on. And so now
Right.
you have these, what I call massively mixed fleets of generations of technology out there. And so if you imagine that if you're on the other side, Jim, you have an old 30-year-old motor from, I don't know, my old GE Motors business, and you got a
Mhm.
brand new motor you got from somebody new, which is completely different instrumentation, different everything. How do you as an operating manager figure out who to call, what for, and when, right? And more importantly, Jim, I don't know how your manufacturing career progressed, but I know in the early days of a manufacturing career, I had a whole maintenance crew in the plant.
Right.
A lot of plants I go to don't have maintenance crews anymore,
Right.
right? So now
Yep.
suddenly it's not just you got this massive mixed fleet of assets you own, but half your people that you used to rely on are all gone, right? And so
Yep.
you're seeing this issue of complexity of brain drain on the operating side, and the same thing's happening on the manufacturing side, the equipment
Yeah.
OEM side, right? So this is a big deal. I mean, I maybe I'm just a boy who's crying wolf, but I think it's a big deal right now
I
across the board.
I continue to say it's a bigger deal than I think almost anyone is wrapping their
Oh,
minds around, and you just made me think of something I hadn't even thought of before. We talk about the tribal knowledge around knowing the equipment, but the things you're talking about around knowing things like what service to do
that's
on
right.
what period,
That's right.
all that goes away too.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. Now, the saving grace for us, Jim, is I know people have made a big deal about Gen AI, but this Gen AI thing is actually pretty impressive, right? So one of the things we're doing is, so you correctly pointed out that we are using stranded data from ERP, CRM, sales, EPLMs, all these different systems. So that's all structured data today, right?
Mhm.
It's in the form of tables and fields, and we bring all the data and put it together and make sense of it. But the beautiful part about Gen AI is now it's allowing us to access massive amounts of unstructured data in the form of service notes, repair manuals, engineering notes, blah blah blah. So now we are creating this big stew, as I call it, pot of stew, with all these unstructured data assets, making sense of it and matching it to the structured data set. Now,
Yep.
now all kinds of fun stuff can start happening because now we can say, oh, I saw these notes that Jim had put in some service ticket, or I found this repair manual that exists for such and such. And over time, these are all the things that have happened. And I can now start, quote unquote, querying that data, matching it to
Mhm.
structured data, and making more sense of it. I think that to me is probably the big breakthrough that I'm excited by in terms of how we can bridge that gap that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I need to make a big mental note here because I've been saying how, and I'm no AI expert by any means, but based on talking to a lot of the guys who are, my understanding is that it's this real ability to take huge data sets and see patterns humans aren't going to see, assess
Correct.
enormous amounts of data humans aren't going to be able to assess, and then make useful recommendations out of that. So you guys are just like the poster child for what I've been describing is how you're using it.
It's great. I mean, it's actually amazing, right? So come back to your as a plant manager example, right? So you have these
Mhm.
motors out there. So your maintenance guys knew what the manuals were. But imagine if the OEM came to you and say, "Hey, Jim, I have this asset strategy or asset plan for you for the next 2 years, and this is how I think we can help you get the most out of this motor." Again, I'm using motor because in my one of the factories I ran, we had tons of
Yeah.
motors, right?
Yep.
This is how I'm going to help you manage and maintain your 25 motors that you have in this factory. And here's the plan. In the old days, somebody had to go scratch information from this system, that system, manual, this, that, and put it together. Now we're getting to the stage where I literally am joking with my engineering team. It's like, I want to be able to press button, get plan, right? Because if I have all this data, I have all these notes and unstructured information and so on and so forth, I ought to be able to assemble this information and say, Jim, here's your plan for the 25 motors in your plant today,
Yeah.
right? It's amazing. And that day is not too far away, Jim.
Right.
It's pretty soon. I think within the next few months, you're going to start seeing that stuff.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. And to your point, it's not just about dealing with problems of things we had and that have gone away. It's now taking us to places we've never been
That's
and
right.
improving further.
That's right. It really
Yeah.
is. I mean, it's amazing. And again, I think I'm a little older than you, but I've seen enough change in the last 35 years. It's fascinating to watch all this stuff happen now. You know,
I feel the same way. It's seeing these things that are happening today that we never would have even
that's right.
dreamed of.
That's right. That's very cool.
Um, when you think about customers, the people that you're trying to help out, what are the things today that you see they're missing where if they could better wrap their minds around the opportunity, they could get ahead?
I'm speaking out of just respect for having lived the lives my customers live, right? They are
Yeah.
so caught up in firefighting every day that they
Yep.
can't see the forest from the trees, right? That's probably the single biggest issue. And I keep saying, man, you're leaving all this money on the table. Look at all the stuff you can do. And he's like, yeah, but I just lost 2 technicians. What am I going to do with that, right? So the firefighting ethos that unfortunately you and I grew up with in manufacturing has not gone away yet. In fact, it's getting worse, right? So if there's a way for us to kind of make that firefighting less and less painful, I think that'll be a big deal, and that's probably the big thing I'd like to see happen in our world that you and I, live in.
How much do you run into around being able to get your software adopted because of just IT um, pushback, hesitance to connect with another system, things like that?
Great question. I mean, you could be asking me my objection handling questions right there, right? Uh, so look, no IT person can correctly so wants to get yet one more system in their landscape. I totally get it. So
Yeah.
that tends to be a big part of the pushback. But luckily, what we've done is we've been able to build the integrations into the most commonly used CRMs, like Dynamics, like Salesforce, and now going to be HubSpot and C4C soon. And that reduces that friction or that objection because we can let our system run in the background, as they call it, headless if you wanted to, and just so the user only lives in the CRM of choice, right? So that's one way to get around it. But I think IT tends to get so overwhelmed with all the day-to-day stuff is that if we can
Yeah.
find a way to make it easy for them and not add to the workload, I think they're more than happy to be supportive partners with the business.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I hadn't heard that particular take before around kind of free riding on another system, but that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's we have to do that. We have to drive integrations into these systems because, like, I don't blame the CIOs, the IT management, right? Because there's yet one more system is one more system manage and maintain is a pain in the neck.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just think about the workload alone anytime they think about a new system, even if it's really
Absolutely.
not something that's going to take huge input from them. That's the way they're going to see it up
Yep,
front, obviously.
exactly.
But then, too, the whole cybersecurity risk. You think about, oh, it's another connection point
That's
or
right.
another,
That's
you
right.
know, inroad for the bad actors.
And that's always one of the first questions we get asked about security, certifications, and so on and so forth. So,
And
as a
which is a good
provider,
thing.
yeah, it's a good thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's something we welcome because we do want them to get comfortable that we have the right certifications, we've got the right testing done, because it's as much my liability as theirs. In fact, I argue that as a vendor, I feel liable for managing and maintaining the data correctly.
Yep. Excellent. Now, when you think about kind of the biggest hitters on opportunities for your customers? What do those look like? Are there big areas where you're showing the biggest gains right out the gate?
Yeah. So, I mentioned that part of why I started is that I always thought that there was a lot of proactive selling that I could not do easily and make it repeatable and scale. And the consequence of that is that, like most people, we tend to focus on your quote unquote top customers. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The top customers remain top for a reason, and the others are not top customers for a reason. So the biggest advantages, the biggest upside that my customers see is they get a deeper penetration into the install base of customers, right? So they can touch more customers more repeatably and scalably. So that allows them to start winning what I would call market share. And then secondly, because we make it easy for them to know which customer has which equipment and what they need, they can gain wallet share of that customer, which is to say that if I have a equipment that has a potential to have about $1,500, $2,000 per year of spend for maintenance. In the past, they may be getting $500 of it, maybe $600 of it. The ability for us to give them this insight allows them to capture more and more of that wallet share. So it's a combination of first market share and then wallet share next.
Yep. Yep. And the interesting thing, based on what you're saying, is they can get more coming to them, but for the end customer, it really could mean no additional spending if they're doing
Absolutely
things right.
Absolutely right. Yep.
Fascinating. And then thinking about Entytle itself, are there other opportunities that you're looking at for down the road? Where do you see, your future, say the next 5 or 10 years?
So I like all entrepreneurs, I have this crazy vision of wanting to be like the central central system of record for machines, right? Whether you call it an asset CRM, or I know you're from Wisconsin, like an EMR, like an Epic. Maybe that's wrong analogy, but Epic for assets, right? That's where I see the opportunity and the value of the technology that's being created for us these days with Gen AI and everything else is amazing. Now it's allowing us to bring all this information into one system that allows us to make all these use cases. So I gave you the example of the asset plan, press button, get plan. We're literally developing that as we speak right now, right?
Oh, wow.
So hopefully in the next 3 months, I'll be able to give my customers the first thing, which says, I've uploaded all the portfolio of products. I can build you an asset plan for each customer now, right? And that takes energy and time, and then there'll be a refinement over time. Then there's this automatic, the Gen AI chatbots that everybody's building, but there's a lot of technology down the line. And then maybe, Jim, at some point, there'll be enough connected assets that are streaming data that I can now get streaming data from the asset, or real-time data from the asset, and bring it back into the platform. So the development is, there's a lot of room for development and growth in the company in terms of how we think about it.
Well, yeah. And of course, you have that added benefit that you're making use of this AI creature that has just barely begun, right? There's so much more coming down the road.
There's some pretty interesting stuff that can be done for people in our world.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some unbelievable things in the next 5 or 10 years, and
Yeah.
you're right there positioned to ride along with it. So I applaud you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything about what you guys are doing we haven't touched on that folks ought to know?
No, I think the only thing I would say to your listeners is that, especially those who are equipment manufacturing businesses, is that your install base is really the value of your business, if you think about it, right? If you're a company that's been operating for 30, 40 years, I'd say a majority of your revenue comes from existing customers. Your new equipment sales are probably from existing customers, definitely aftermarket and services existing customers. So treat your install base like it's valuable and gold, right? That's what I would say. And people kind of take it for granted too often, I think, in the business I'm in. And I just want to make people, tell people, hey, be intentional. This is a high value goal you're sitting on. So that's what I would say.
Well, that's a great point. And I'm going to plead guilty. I've been that manufacturing leader who, pushes things down the road and takes advantage of it. But you're right. Those installed assets are a competitive advantage if you're taking the best care of them you can.
That's right.
Well, excellent. Vivek, this has been absolutely illuminating.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. And it's good to talk to somebody who's been on the other side of the fence from me as a manufacturing manager as well, manufacturing leader as well. So,
well, it was great talking to you. And I'm definitely going to keep track of what you guys have going on, because to me, it's just a fundamental story in so many ways with what we're seeing across the broad scope of manufacturing, and I think you're just really well positioned to take advantage of some things where, it's that ideal transaction, right? You're providing this enormous value to people like me, and therefore you benefit. So it's
That's right.
capitalism working the way it should.
Absolutely. Capitalism is
Good
good.
deal. Well,
Awesome.
Vivek, thanks so much for joining us today.
Jim, thank you very much. And thank you for pronouncing my name absolutely perfectly.
You're welcome.
Uh,
And of course, as always, thanks to those of you in the audience. If you're in manufacturing, I hope you really paid attention, because I think this is just a phenomenal story, and there's some real benefits everyone in my world can go after here. I can't promise everyone's going to bring the benefits that like Vivek did today, but everyone who's on this show has some benefit they're bringing. So we're here every Tuesday, even some Thursdays. Tune back in. We'll have another show for you next week. This is Jim Vinosky from Manufacturing Talk signing off. So long.
bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.